Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're talking all things valuations, anything that you want to know in and around that. And in order to do that, from WBP Group, I have a very special guest, Joshua Ruzzier. Hey Josh, how are you, mate?
I'm well. How are you, Rob?
Not too bad. All I've got to do is find the button that throws your name on the page, and then everyone know exactly who you are. So mate, we're going to talk valuations. So clearly you're a valuer. But tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, WPB Group, and why we should be listening to you today.
Yeah, sure. I've actually just gone 10 years, show my age there, in property valuations experience. So currently I am the commercial director for property valuations in Victoria. I'm a CPV, which is a certified practicing valuer, and have been for some time. What was the other question? Sorry, Ron?
Oh, who are WPB Group, mate?
Yeah,
This
so
is the free plug. Go for the free plug.
Yeah, you're throwing me a bone there. So WBP, we're a national valuer for residential, commercial valuations. We do some specialised as well, and we represent every state, I think, except for the Northern Territory. We're predominantly residential, but we do a lot of commercial work as well, and development sites, which I'm sure a lot of your members have dealt with in the past. So I'm happy to talk about all things development, all things commercial, and all things valuation. So let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Well, for our audience out there, are on the cusp of both the residential and commercial side of things. So quite often they'll just do a small duplex or a 1 or 2 subdivision, then they'll kick on and start doing the larger projects and that sort of thing. So there's probably elements of this world, both in the residential and valuation space, that they're going to love. But you being the commercial space, we're going to dive deeper into there because that's where we want those guys to get to. So let's give them some inspiration and aspirations to get there. Firstly, why don't we just start with a definition? What's the difference between a residential and a commercial valuation?
Look, I wouldn't say there's any difference between them. They're all defined by Spencer's case, which basically what defines what market value is. So, look, there are multiple reasons we do valuations for. Mortgage security is the predominant one, but we also do them for family law, stamp duty, capital gains, all private factors, pre-purchase, pre-sale. Now, every valuation that we do, regardless of it being residential or commercial, they're all defined by the same market value.
Yeah, so it's probably more with regards to, I guess, the funding side of things that I was referencing, because the financiers take a different perspective, I guess, depending upon the size of the deal. I guess from a residential space, they're tending to look at a property that you're going to own for anywhere from 20 to 30 years. Whereas in the commercial space, they're recognizing that, hey, you're doing this as a career to develop and sell the finished product typically. And so they're looking at that as a much shorter term process from the development potential itself. And so slightly different perspectives from a funding. Now, how much does that influence the instructions that yourselves get? What are called standing instructions? I would imagine, I guess, the difference between a residential standing instruction and a commercial one is slightly different.
Yeah, I mean, like we got every lender that we have different standing instructions, and that basically sets the scope for what the job actually should be. But there's nothing in there to say, oh, you've got to be low on this or high on this. Basically, if you've got a straightforward residential, it might set out what format that needs to go on. Same thing for commercial. But if you've got a commercial job that's, say, for something like construction finance, those standing instructions might go further to say, it's like, well, we want to know what the current value of the property is with planning permits, but we also want to know what the gross realisation value is of that, say, 4 to 8 townhouses on completion as at the valuation date. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, in simplistic views, it's the level of detail that the bank wants you to go to in order to justify your position is kind of how I interpret that. Is that?
Yeah, it's a fair assumption. Yeah.
Yeah, and so every bank is going to have a slightly different perspective on the different level of detail, because they're either very savvy in that department, or they're very conservative and they want a little bit more detail. So you might get different instructions from each bank, but basically who's paying you to do the job is basically the one giving you the, I guess, how much work you're doing.
Correct. And like, to be clear, we don't deal with the finance side at all. We get an instruction from the lender. That is our client. They make the deal happen, whether they need your pre-sales or they don't, or they need so much equity or they don't. That's not the valuer's job. Our job is to value the actual property.
Very good. Now, a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned a case called Spencer's, right? I want to just kind of flesh that out just a little bit, because a lot of people would have gone and missed that. This was a law case that happened from memory all the way back in 1907 between Spencer's and the Commonwealth Government, where they determined what, I guess, the definition of a valuation actually was. And that's predominantly become the foundation piece for every valuation that's ever occurred ever since. Now, there's a whole bunch of interesting talking points to there. Now, we're not going to get into the legal side of it or anything like that, but there's some pretty clear outcomes that come out of that legislation, or sort of that court case. So give me some insights into what some of those were. Like, one that comes to mind would be, what is deemed to be, I guess, fair market price?
Yeah, so I think let's just go back a little bit. I'd love to recite Spencer's case, and it's actually been updated since it came out. But basically, what came out of Spencer's case defines how valuers undertake valuations for market value purposes. So basically, it's an estimated amount for which an asset, and it's now been updated to an asset or liability, will transact on the valuation date between a willing buyer, that's important, willing buyer, and a willing seller in an arm's length transaction after proper marketing, and the parties had each acted knowledgeably, prudently, and without compulsion. So all the key points in there, I think I tried to emphasize them a little bit, basically is going to set us into, I guess, the next load of questions.
Yeah, like, there's a whole bunch of elements, like you said, in there. So every single one of those key points you said probably is a rabbit hole all in itself. So basically you're saying, look, an uninformed buyer is not market value. An over-anxious seller is not market value. So what would make an uninformed buyer, for example?
Well, another one. So it says, after proper marketing, a classic example of an uninformed buyer might be subject to two-tier marketing, where basically you're an uninformed, either interstate or even international buyer that's being sold something that hasn't actually been offered to the wider market. That would be an uninformed buyer in that case. And that's probably the most classic example. Obviously, property is emotional, and auction still states, it's like, well, that can still be defined under market value, but you do have to act knowledgeably and prudently. You can't just get carried away and sign what you want on a contract.
Yeah, and the other one is it can't be an over-anxious seller. So couldn't be someone who's in financial distress, for example, or having to sell because they're going through a divorce, or those sorts of things where, they, under normal circumstance, they don't want to be selling that property.
Yeah, I mean, we have conversations with agents all day, every day. It's like, well, why is this sale a little bit lower? And if they told us, it's like, well, it was a deceased estate, it was held by state trustees, and they just wanted a quick sale, and we couldn't give a full whack at the marketing campaign or get to our wider audience. That is an example where it could have sold below what it could have in market. And when we undertake valuations as well, we do value for a 0 to 6 month selling period. So not that it sells in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, for example.
Yeah, mate, I've just noticed a typo on our little logo underneath, so I'm going to just change that really quick. So I had it back to front with WBP. It's now hopefully the correct way around.
Yeah.
We've got to get the marketing right, mate. Yeah, absolutely. So, which means you, as a valuer, have to do a whole bunch of investigative work. Sherlock Holmes actually going out, and it's not just looking at the simplicity of the record on the transaction on platforms like National Property Data or RP Data and the like, but you actually have to look under the covers on some of that. So what are some of the sleuthing techniques that you do to try and unravel some of those mysteries, mate?
Yeah, look, there's the wool often tries to get covered over our eyes. A classic one, probably when you said that, it made me think of the title. So if you've got, for example, encumbrances on title here in Victoria, there's a single residential covenant on a lot of property, particularly in the north. But if an agent doesn't disclose that, or a property actually just transact between, say, known parties, it goes from brother to sister, but they don't tell them. It's like, yeah, I'm going to sell you this property, but there's this single dwelling covenant on it. These are the kind of things that we can unravel. Another example is we do look into whether permissions have been granted for, say, building or planning. For example, unpermitted or illegal mezzanine in a warehouse. We can find that out. We go in there, we look. Okay, has that been built post the date of sale? Okay, do you have a building permit? We're going to check with council. We have to make all those checks before sending out an actual valuation, because at the end of the day, we're on the line, and a valuation report can quickly be set aside and heard in a court if we do get something wrong that could have a significant effect on market value.
Yeah, so there's other things that don't represent market value. So, and you touched on it very quickly, but related sales. So, a brother selling it to a sister, a father selling to a son, all those sorts of things being passed down, I guess, through, death and that sort of thing. So that there's a lot of examples where you're actually going to see a transaction on record that doesn't necessarily represent value.
Yeah, so valuers, we see right through that. And look, a classic example is RP data. It gets all the data, but we're going to check. We don't just rely on that. For example, if I'm looking at the latest retail sales, I'll actually jump on Real Commercial, go, okay, what's transacted? It might not have hit these data platforms yet. But if you've got, for example, a little bit of data saying a property has sold between maybe a brother and sister for $1 million, but there's no record of it. It's not on realestate.com.au or Domain. It's not on any sales platforms. It's like, well, we don't know how that actual figure came to. Was there an agent involved? Was there proper marketing? No, we've discussed that. That doesn't meet the definition of market value.
Yeah. So you mentioned RP data there, mate. I'm going to kind of just go National Property Data. That's the platform of choice from my side of the world, which is a competitor, bit of an upstart out there, but similar sorts of data from similar sources, but just very different in how it actually interrogates the data, be able to get the answers much, much faster, especially, I guess, from a developer's perspective, and even as a valuer. I know that you haven't used the platform, mate, but I'm going to encourage you to have a look. That said, mate, a couple of other things that wouldn't be, I guess, representative of market value. So when, I guess, a local jurisdiction or a state government, I guess, resumes the land or takes the land back, it might be for road widening, or they want to do some a train station or things like that. Has different terminologies in different states. I'm aware of it on the eastern seaboard as resumption. I think you guys call it something else.
Yeah, we call that so compensation valuations. That's another way to value a property, and it really does take into account what the property was worth before, say, that piece of land was taken away or that freeway was put through the middle of your farm, and the after value. And it basically will determine the compensation that is owed to the landlord of that property. It's a specialized valuation. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
No, we won't, because it doesn't apply in most instances, but it's more letting people know that, and the key message I want people to take away from this is, look, as soon as you see any sale result on one of these data platforms, you have to look at it with a grain of salt and say, look, that is not necessarily representative of a sale, okay? So do a little bit of sleuthing yourselves. Take the mindset of a valuer and go, should I actually be including this, yes or no, in order to make that determination?
You know what? I think something on that as well, and to really determine if a sale sold and to get into the nitty gritty. As valuers, every day we talk to agents, we pick up the phone. Is this a confirmed sold sale? Were there underbidders? Did you have a lot of demand? I mean, that's valuable information that we get. We need to put it into our report, but there's no reason you can't be, I guess, like a valuer yourself in sense of doing that research and finding out if a property actually transacted.
Yeah, and this is probably a key point, a little bit of a rabbit hole I'll go down here. If you go and every vendor coming to you is going to say, look, I want this amount of money, right? And the valuer is going to say this amount. There's going to be a differential between them because one, I guess the vendor is always optimistic on their sale. Two, they've had a real estate agent who's pumped their tires with an appraisal versus a valuation, saying that they can get huge amounts of money for it. And three, they don't know how to assess the true market value in the process that we've done. So the properties they might be comparing against might be different zoning, might be different land size, might be all sorts of different reasons that actually don't make that an actual comparable sale. So we need to take the perspective of a valuer to go, if we're going to get finance approval from a bank, the next step is the bank's going to go ask the valuer. So we need to know how that's going to be interpreted, how that's going to be assessed, so that we know whether or not we're actually setting our expectations correctly, that we can actually get this deal across the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what valuers do. It is a very in-depth analysis of basically all the property characteristics, the title, things like the improvements, the location, to actually determine that value and get it to a valuation basis where we can look at sales on a like-for-like basis and determine their value.
Which is an interesting segue to say, well, the difference between a valuation and an appraisal. So a real estate agent, so you guys have done, depending upon the state, somewhere between a 3 and a 4 year degree in order to get your qualifications. In some states, a real estate agent does like 2-week course in order to get their license. What's the primary difference between a valuation and an appraisal?
Yeah, sure. I've actually heard you can get your agent's representative in 4 days. So that's even less. But look,
so
an appraisal sets the selling price for a property. Market value is as at the date of valuation. So that's probably the first thing, because that selling appraisal on, say, your 2 townhouses that you're going to build, it'll be maybe 2 years' time. So the market value goes far further in depth into the characteristics of the property, the zoning, the title, the legal aspects, as well as that like for like on comparable sales. There's also a check method usually used to help determine value or reconcile what that value is, where you could ask 10 different real estate agents for 10 different appraisals. They might all come in at different numbers, where valuers, we're usually pretty on point with what the property is actually worth at that date of valuation.
Yeah, there's always a range, as you can imagine, because it's never a perfect like for like in every single instance. And so there's a little bit of science that has to go into it from your side. I'll call it a black art.
Yeah, absolutely. With sales, and this is it, I think a big myth that has come into what valuations is that we work off averages, which is not at all the case. It's never an average. even though a lot of your data comes out, this is the median house price, etc. It's not about that. It's about finding where your subject property sits amongst the sales. You might have high sales, you might have low sales. The high sales are going to be superior to yours, low sales inferior. If it's a bank valuation, where you can sit in that range can also depend on where the market is, and I guess what the future market outlook could potentially be. So if you know you're in a pretty steady market or an improving market, and you've got a pretty high contract at say $1 million, and your valuation's coming in at around 950, it's like, well, really, you're less than 10% out of that. There could be potential in your sales to adopt that contract. Where if it's a falling market, it's vice versa. It's like, well, we know it's going bad. Michelle Bullock might, I know, add another couple of basis points. We're probably going to be more like this sale, which sold most recently and is the best determinant of what the market value actually is going forward. So that's how that works.
Yep, very good, mate. Look, and picking up on some of that and kind of closing a loop on a couple of other things, it's evidence-based, based on actual transactions at a point in time, which means that you can only do a valuation now or some point in the past where that evidence actually exists, but you don't have a crystal ball. You can't predict the future. Am I right there?
Yes, no, absolutely right. I did like that reference, the crystal ball as well.
Yeah. So now, as a different perspective, we need to take multiple points of view in when we're looking at these things. As a developer, we have to be looking at, look, how do we get the finance across the line? We need to use the bank and the valuer to actually determine, I guess, that value in today's market. But our project might take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to run. We've got to take a position on where do we think the market is going. Now, the valuer can't inform on that. And so quite often we see, hey, the market's going up. Why doesn't the valuer give us a good number? Because we know that but your hands are tied. You don't have a choice in that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really comes down to the standing instructions that we get from our client, from our lender. They're not looking at what the property is going to be worth in, say, 2-3 years' time. They want to know what they can fall back on. So that's why if we're valuing a gross realization value, a GRV, it's at today's date. It's not what it's going to be worth in, say, 2 years' time, but it's at today's date based off past sales. And really in a dynamic market like this one, you really have to rely upon your most recent sales.
Yeah, and I'm going to exaggerate that point just for the purposes of our audience actually understanding. Markets go up and down all the time, okay? And so a sale that's recorded today is going to be reflective of somebody's opinion on why they were actually selling probably 3 to 4 months ago. That they wanted to sell it, they wanted to put it on market, they had to talk to some agents, go through a process. So the record that happens today is reflective of somebody's mindset 4 or 5 months ago. But as the market is going in one direction or the other, whether or not that mindset is reflective of where the market is heading is sometimes in a completely different position. So if the market is going up, then the actual sales recorded are going to be looking backwards at somebody's opinion at that point in time, even though transaction was recorded today, which means that we think it's going to skyrocket and people start chasing their tail. And in a rising market, a lot of people get emotional and buy properties. And then they go, why doesn't my val stack? Well, because you got emotional, but the sale hasn't represented that yet everywhere else in the market.
I think this is really important about the point we talked about before with everyday, say, developers being like valuers. Call your agents. Agents are a great source of knowledge to help determine what are the levels of demand, what are the levels of supply, where do they think the market's going. We do that as valuers as well, and that's really how we can determine, because we don't just talk about the market, we determine, I guess, for that specific asset, your subject property. If you've got, for example, Melbourne CBD office, and you speak with agents and you go, oh, look, where did the underbidders come in at this? How many offers did you have on this? And they start going, it's like, well, things aren't up. And like, really, like, we know that already, but it's reaffirmed by a professional that deals with buyers and sellers every day.
Yep. And the same is true when the market's going in the other direction. So when the market's actually dropping, the reflective sales that were measured they're going to potentially show a higher value than by the time you actually get to the point of settlement of that property yourself. So if you've negotiated a 6-month delayed settlement, for example, and the market's dropped between your assessment and then, you've got to start to think about that sort of stuff when you're making these sorts of offers.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where the risk comes to valuers in particular. We can look at the 2021 year and particularly the Victorian market, and I think it was 0.1% cash rate for that whole year. And it gradually started going up in 2022. And you could actually see how quick prices were starting to fall again. But we didn't know that by December 2021. We were looking at sales 3-6 months. Sometimes they can go back 2 years. And if you're a valuer that's looking backwards, you're not going to get the correct result.
Yeah. And so the key point to all of this, folks, is you need to be very precise and very aware of everything that's happening in your market right here, right now, right? Which is one of the reasons why I tell everyone to get very narrow and very deep on your knowledge so you can actually become the expert in that and not have to do a 3 or 4 year degree to know many, many markets all at the same time.
I'm still paying off my government debt for my university, Rob. So, yeah, that's very good advice.
Almost everybody is, mate. Almost everybody is. Okay, so we touched on it before, different purposes for valuation. So it's not just, hey, I'm buying a property. What are the other reasons why, why you need a valuation?
Yeah, absolutely. So pre-purchase, if you don't know and you are unsure about the market and you don't know how much a property should actually sell for, you can get a pre-purchase valuation, which basically says, look, a valuer is actually comfortable with putting this figure on there, or even a range in the case of pre-purchase that I can go up to, and I know I have the comfort that that valuation that the valuer has done will actually stack up also as a mortgage security valuation. So we're tied to that. The same works with pre-sale as well. It's like, I'm not really sure about this agent. They're giving me a pretty wide range. I want to know what my property actually is worth. What's my bottom line? What should my reserve be? Capital gains is another one, or for any tax exemptions. A really good one could be with development sites to get the GST margin scheme. If you've been gifted a property prior to GST coming in, you need a retrospective valuation. So retrospective, it's back in time. We do it back as July 2000, which is something that'll go to the SRO, it'll go to the taxation office, and it says, yes, we can deduct the gross realisation by that value. So there are a lot of needs for valuers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and hence, that may potentially alter what the standing instruction is from the bank, depending upon the purpose of the valuation. And so the level of detail that you go into in your val becomes different. And each bank will be different again on even for the same kind of valuation purpose. So you guys are trying to juggle lots of different levels of detail all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we get standing instructions from the bank, but your instruction from the consumer as well, we've got to listen to that. We're bound by that as to, do you need a range? Do you not need a range? Do you want an exact figure? we've got to work out all of this in our instructions and our disclaimers. So,
yeah, I got one instruction, mate. Just make it at the top, as high as you can go.
okay. Yeah.
No, clearly that was just joking. Okay, so now different ways of actually doing evaluation. So most people are familiar with what is called the direct comparison method. Okay, where you touched on it before. Is my property better or worse than the other sales that actually occurred? But what are the other ways that you can actually do evaluation?
Yeah, so a great example for commercial property, which is generally sometimes can be an investment type product, is we rely on what's called the capitalization approach, which is the assessed market rent that the property should have at the date of valuation by an assessed what's called a yield. It's a return on income. So it's something like $100,000 divided by, say, a yield of 5% currently for under 5 mil industrial property is around that 5%. What does that equate to? Okay, it's around $800,000, which is actually within line of my primary approach, which might be the direct comparison approach, which is coming at around 900,000. And in that case, you've got two different values. As a valuer that you've worked with, you adopt your primary approach. You don't find somewhere generally in the middle of those two approaches. If your market dictates the primary approach, that's what you adopt.
Yep. So there's that direct comparison. There's I guess the capitalization of rents. There's also one called summation. So how does summation work?
So summation is your land plus the added value of your depreciated improvements, basically, if I can put it that way. To determine the land, you determine that first. You need to find raw land sales. To determine the improvements, not only do you need your raw land sales, because you've got to analyze each one of your comparable sales and also to determine what the summation is on those sales to get your depreciated improvement over your buildings. It comes out as a rate. It could be something like $800 to $2,000 per square meter over your building, and you just add the two together, the land plus the depreciated value of buildings.
Very good. And it's also, I guess, particularly for a property developer, I guess you guys will actually do feasibility analysis as well.
Yeah, absolutely, particularly if you're getting construction finance with a bank. So a feasibility analysis basically determines what a developer can pay for the development site based on a lot of the valuer's assumptions, as well as the raw costs that are going to be incurred by that developer and the gross realization value that we've inputted.
So, mate, all of that, we've got banks telling you to do one thing for a different purpose at a specific point in time. We're kind of getting all the, I guess, all the ingredients of this together. And then, what is an actual market value? So we're kind of understanding that. And all of a sudden, the valuation comes back. It's nowhere near what the agent told it was going to be. It's nowhere near what the vendor wants. It's nowhere where we need for our feasibilities to stack. Why is it that there's this perception from not just property developers, but I guess I'm going to say the country in entirety, that valuers are always conservative? Why is that perception there, mate?
Yeah, I think a little bit of that might be uneducation. A lot of people don't know what valuers actually do, and this relying upon comparable confirmed sales is one of them. And a good way to get your valuation up, for example, even on your house, make sure that there are sales that are comparable to yours that have sold recently, because that's what your property is going to be compared against in terms of value. That's really important. We're not conservative on purpose. We rely upon sales evidence because that's what we've got to hang our hat on.
Yeah, and I guess if I flesh that out just a little bit more, if you have a PPR and you're wanting to go and refinance because you want to pull some equity out or things like that, then the timing of when you do that is critical. So if you're in a rising market and you're seeing lots of really good sales, go do that then, right? Don't do it when you're in a falling market and all the evidence is not supportive of that. So if Joe Bloggs 2 streets away just got the record sale for the area, go get it revaled today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But if somebody's squatter's house down the road did it, that's probably not a good time to do that either. So, mate, what are some other ways that we can get our values up?
Yeah, so I think a big one that we do see is get all necessary permissions for your improvements. So the example I gave before, we see a lot in Victoria where the owner has built a mezzanine inside a warehouse. Make sure you actually get a permit for that, because otherwise the valuer is going to walk in there, he's going to ask that question, do his homework, and if it turns out there's no building permit, not only do we not allow for that area in our analysis, in most cases we also deduct a capital expenditure allowance to get that removed. Now we have to do that, and that again comes down to the standing instructions, because the risk is on the lender. Other ways, if you're getting a gross realisation value and you need your construction finance, make sure that you do have good functional floor plans in what you are building, and make sure that the specifications are up to scratch for your target market as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in doing the specifications up to scratch, have a full fixtures and fittings schedule and breakdown, so they can actually see this is the kind of stone we're going to do, this is the kind of flooring we're going to do, this is the kind of taps that we're going to put in here, and where appropriate, actually put together a 3D rendered image that actually represents what that's physically going to look like, because seeing it on a brochure does not necessarily represent what it's actually going to look like in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And we look at contract specifications all day. We know, I guess, what's a high-end specification compared to something that's quite cheap and might just be an IKEA build. So make sure it's to your market as well. Like if you're going to rent them out anyway, you might not necessarily need those flash marble benches. So that's one. I think a big thing on that question before is with commercial property as well. And it actually comes down to what's the highest and best use of your specific site. And that's an example. If you've got, say, a dated shop and dwelling on 1,000 square meters on a high street, and you can maximize the potential of that property by redeveloping it to, say, build, I don't know, a 4-story apartment building, if you're going to release that shop and dwelling that's existing there, make sure you put in all appropriate development clauses within that lease. Because if you sign away something to the tenant for, say, 5 years, you're not going to be able to touch it for 5 years because they've got the right to occupy that space.
Yeah. So if we, and you touched on highest and best use, if we put that more into some of the kind of product that our audience will actually be doing, sometimes what you're doing, let's just say, for example, you could get, 4 3-bedroom townhouses onto a site. You do your assessment on what the valuation of those would be, but you would equally go and say, well, what if I did 3 4-bedders and have a look at what the demographic of the area is, and by creating less product, it might be less expensive to build, sell them for a higher price point. So the highest and best use might be a completely different outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, and that's what we're seeing, particularly in Victoria. There is a lull in the development market, and a lot of these properties that actually do have these permits for apartments is a big one. Discussions with agents, a lot of the time, that apartment permits go up 6 levels. Buyers don't want that. They'd rather just build a cheaper, say, 6 townhouses and be able to sell them, get a cheaper construction price. So know your market, know the market in the area.
Yeah. Oh, who is buying your finished product? Is it a young small family who needs a backyard? Is it someone who's going to age in place, and so they need wider doorways and room for the Zimmer frame and all that sort of stuff, right? So build your product fit for purpose, folks. I like to put highest and best use in lay speak. It's the most amount of money in the least amount of time with the least amount of hassle. So how can I turn that product over fast by giving the exact product to the exact person that needs it at the right time?
It has to be legally possible as well. That's very
yeah, well, that little chestnut. All good, mate. Okay, some parting words of wisdom. How do we best engage with a valuer? So many instances the bank has gone and chosen the valuer, and yet we sometimes you get one valuation firm who might come in low and another firm that you think is going to come in high. How do I engage a direct valuer and then get that handed over to the bank? Is that even possible anymore?
Look, it's not. And there are a lot of platforms that don't allow for that monopoly. That said, if you know a good valuation firm such as WBP, you can tell your broker, look, if you get 3 quotes in, I would like to choose this firm because I know so-and-so, or yes, they do have a good job. A lot of the time as well, it comes from word of mouth. It's how you were treated on the valuation inspection can be important. How quick do you need that job? For example, if you need finance yesterday, you want a firm that can give you a quick turnaround time as well. There are a lot of different aspects to choosing the best valuer, and WBP does hit a lot of those aspects.
Yeah, and look, if you're trying to get a high val out of a valuer, whilst you can't tell them what to do, folks, you can certainly make their job easier. If you are an expert in the area and you already know what sales are actually transacting and what ones may not necessarily have hit the books yet, but have actually transacted, point your valuer in the right direction. Hey, go talk to this agent. He's just signed a contract. If anything that you guys can do to actually help the valuer out, I'm sure that they're going to appreciate being able to stop for a cup of coffee and just relax because they managed to get the research just that little bit easier.
You know what, Rob? That's actually a really good point, and that's something that you can actually do if you are getting a valuation. Provide as much information as you can. We don't get a lot, but if you've done your research, you know that there's some settled sales that are comparable to yours in the area. Send that along with the instruction to the bank saying, yes, I want to get my property revalued. Send it along with your building specifications, your construction plans, because we're going to look at it, because all of a sudden I know, look, if I don't look at the sales that have actually been provided to me, this could get set aside or it could get queried because I haven't included the most comparable sales.
Yeah. Mate, what about a curly question? So there's a lot of times where an area is zoned for one thing, and then instantaneously council or state government says we're going to rezone that, it's going to become something else, and there's no evidence of that ever having occurred ever. Is it just, how do we try to work out what we get from a val for that?
So look, in that circumstance, you'd have to look on the facts of what that rezoning is. So if you are currently, for example, in a general residential zone, but then a government gazette's come out saying this is going to go now to a residential growth zone or a development zone. As a valuer, we've got to look at the parameters around when will that rezoning happen. Is it going to be in a month's time? Is it going to be in 5 years' time? That's basically what we've got to look at. If it's in a month's time, it's like, well, really, the prices then that are going to be paid for this property are going to be based off that development zone. So then we've got to keep everything like for like and look at sales that have that same zoning that's going to be in the development zone. But if it's in 5 years' time, that's another question, because is it a certain 5 years' time, or is it just earmarked for 5 years' time? That's where the valuer really has to look into the circumstances of that rezoning. We look into the precinct structure plans for that area as well as other sales.
So, and on top of that, and I'm just speculating here, so maybe this isn't the case at all, but it may have actually been rezoned, but there might just not be demand yet. So just because it's rezoned to create something new, if there's no demand for it, I'm anticipating that they would have an implication on that as well, to say, well, the deals are not going to stack yet.
Yeah, well, that should be proven inside sales evidence, that there is no demand. And if there's no demand shown, if there's no increase in sale price shown from, say, general residential zoning to residential growth zoning for that specific area, there's no demand, there's no proof that your property is actually worth more having that zoning. However, if there are sales that show higher results given for that, new rezoned development zone, then that's what we have to rely upon. It all comes down to comparing property on a like-for-like basis.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you and getting to know all about valuations and that sort of thing. I know that you're earmarked, I think, to present at one of our upcoming events. I'm not sure of the exact date, but either way, we run these events all the way around the country, folks. We run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. You can turn up to those physically. They are also live streamed all the way around the country. So no matter where you are in the country, you can always be, attending one of our events pretty much every week of the year, mate. So looking forward to your upcoming event. And, mate, thank you very much for all of your valuable insights for today.
No problem, Rob. Thanks for your time.
All good. See you, folks. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.